Alright. So we are now ready to push and start. I will also be discussing how to start the aircraft at the ramp, but that will be again part of the supplementary procedures tutorial or part. So now we're just concentrating on push and start, and you'll notice that the Q400, again, many different airlines do different things with the Q400 when starting the engines and when pushing back. There is a variant where airlines start both engines and then they push back. There's a variant where they start only one engine, which is normally the right engine, then they push back, and then during the pushback they'll start engine 1. And then of course there's the other variant, which is the ramp. We will be doing the starting number 2 first, then pushing back, and then starting 1 during the pushback. That's the one we'll be talking or looking at, because I think it saves more time, and it works just as well. So once you're ready for pushback, call ATC and request pushback if you do not require de-icing. If you're doing de-icing at the ramp, make sure to do the de-icing first and then request pushback, otherwise it might take too long for ATC for you to push back, and they don't like that. Again, we'll be talking about de-icing as well during a supplementary part. If request pushback clearance has been given, call GSX or Ultimate Ground Crew for the pushback. For my purposes, because Ultimate Ground Crew is a bit annoying sometimes and tries to recognize your voice every single time, I will not activate it just yet, but just pretend that I have activated it at this point. Next, you want to make sure that the doors are closed, which we check the fuel lights are out, which they are. Go to battery master switches and make sure they're on at this point now. We'll turn those on. Anti-collision light should be set to red. APU bleed should be off if you're running the APU, or even if you're not running it, should be off. And then confirm that the engines are clear for engine start, which they seem to be. Once you're clear, you call for the engine start checklist, and you will then confirm everything that he says. Engine start checklist.
Battery master main auxiliary standby.
On.
Doors fueling lights.
Closed and out.
Any collision light.
Red.
Go ahead.
APU bleed.
Off.
Engine clear on 2.
Clear on 2.
Engine start checklist complete.
So that's the engine start checklist, and we can now start engine number 2. I'm gonna go and call you. Actually, no.
Flight deck.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and call Ultimate Ground Crew now.
Ground flight deck.
Go ahead.
Please confirm that the brakes are set.
Communications are okay and the brakes are set.
Thanks.
So we're now going to start engine number 2 first. So all you have to say is starting 2, and then you can start number 2. Starting 2. Okay, engine number 2 is started. So we'll disconnect the GPU.
Go ahead, cockpit.
Cockpit to ground.
Go ahead.
Please disconnect the external power.
Go ahead.
Roger. Disconnecting the GPU. Captain, the GPU is now disconnected.
Okay, we'll verify that here. There it is. We can now start pushback.
Go ahead, cockpit. Understood. Facing southwest. Release the brakes, please.
Brakes released.
Okay, commencing pushback.
You'll notice that Ultimate Ground Crew is a bit buggy with this aircraft, so please ignore what will happen once we're done with pushing back.
Go ahead, flight deck. All ground equipment is clear. You can start the engines at your discretion.
Start one for me, please.
Starting 1.
So now it'll start number 1 for you. During the pushback, you should start the engines. When you're not pushing back, you start the engines.
Go ahead, flight deck.
That's a simple rule.
The push is complete. Please set the brakes.
Brakes are set.
Understood.
So engine number 1 is now done. It's now started.
Okay, the turbo is disconnected and the pin is out and the equipment is clear.
You can disconnect and go to hand signals.
Thanks till next time and have a good flight.
Okay, I'm gonna kill him because otherwise he'll listen to me talking again. So, now what we do is we request the after start checklist. It's the same thing as the before start checklist, and as soon as you request that checklist, your first officer and you should do your flows, and then the first officer will start with the checklist. But to save time again, or not to save time, but to make sure that I get everything clear out of the way without having somebody talk behind me or talking with me, we're going to do everything that we're supposed to do when we request the checklist. So the things we need to do is set the condition levers to max, main bus tie to off, APU bleed, gen and APU should be now off. You can also now do a anti-ice test. The way you do it is you check the PSI here, 18.3 at least, or 18 at least. You then check that every system works. You do test. You then check fast, make sure that they all cycle correctly. There should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you would also check manual mode, make sure that works as well. That's how you do a system check for the anti-ice system, but we're not going to do it thoroughly today. You only do that on the first flight of the day, which technically is today right now, but we're not going to discuss that. Next, you would set your ice protection as required. So level 1, the minimum that you need to set are the pitot switches to on, the windshield heat to normal. And because the Dash 8, at least the Majestic Q400 is a bit weird, although in the real plane you would not set this to on, the Majestic will require you to set the pilot side window heat on as well. So go ahead and set these two on as well. So that's level 1. Level 2 is everything that's level 1 plus engine intake to open, which we have. Props selected on, and the ref speeds increase switch to increase, but you keep it off below 1,000 feet. AGL. So it only gets turned on to increase once you're above 1,000 feet. So for now, we're going to keep it off. Next, we're going to verify that our flaps are extended, which we haven't, which our first officer has not done yet. So this is a good time because now we do have the time. I'm going to go and request the after start checklist. After start checklist.
Stand by.
So now he's setting his flaps. We'll verify the flap is set to 5 and the indication agrees. We now need to check our rudder travel, as well as check that the rudder also works without any of the systems. So we'll do full left, verify it shows. I'm going to now disconnect rudder system 1, go back to central, it works. Go to right, turn this back on, turn rudder system 2 off, go to central, and then turn it back on. Now I've checked that the rudder has full travel and that the
external power, APU,
that the standby systems also work. I've done 2 things with 1 stone. Nose wheel steering comes on. Make sure radar is set to standby, which the first officer should do, and your MFD is set to nav. He now just started the after start checklist, which we will now go with him through with him. Off.
Main bus tie.
Off.
Ice protection.
Checked level 2.
Checked level 2. Rudder travel.
Full travel.
Rudder actuator test.
Complete.
Nose wheel steering.
On.
Auto feather.
Auto feather select.
Engine rating.
90% set. Checked. NTOP set checked.
Batteries.
On. Checked.
Flaps.
5 set indicating.
5 set and indicating. Aux standby P2 pumps.
On.
On. Hydraulic pressure quantity.
Checked.
Checked. Hydraulic number 3 in elevator. Checked. Caution warning lights.
Checked.
Flight instruments radios.
Checked.
Checked. Altimeters.
1006 set cross check.
1006. Set and cross-checked. Ice protection test.
Complete.
After start checklist complete.
Okay, so that was the after start checklist. Once we've done that, we can request taxi clearance from ATC, which we now pretend we have received. Once we received it, taxi light can come on. Clear on the left.
And we are clear on the right.
We'll start taxiing. Do a brake check. Okay, brakes work. Okay, so we are parked here. I purposely will not set the emergency brake to park yet because we need to do a few things. So, first we need to do the before takeoff checklist to the line. You can actually time this a bit better by doing it just right before you enter the runway, but because I want to make sure that I get this done and not distracted by taxiing, I wanted to get it, I wanted to be parked already. So you would actually do this while you're rolling and close to the runway, around that area. So you would request a before takeoff checklist to the line, and again, just like any other checklist pretty much, the FO will do his flows, you do your flows, and as soon as you're both done, he will start with the checklist. But again, just like I've said before, we're going to do our flows first, and then we're going to request the checklist. So what you need to do is make sure that 3 trims are set. So takeoff trim, aileron trim, and rudder trim. They're all set for takeoff, which they are. You then do a takeoff config test, make sure nothing is heard. That's the exact reason why I did not set this to park, because if we set this to park, you'll get the warning. We did not get a warning, so that means we're ready for takeoff. We now set our flight taxi switch to flight. You should see that the ailerons here as well as here will deploy. And in the real plane, now this is where maybe some of you noticed that in the real plane you would actually not put in the fuel amount that you have at the gate. You would actually put in the fuel amount that you expect to have during takeoff. That's because the way I understood it, the real plane does not actually take your fuel that you've entered in here and then decrease it over time based off of your fuel flow, if that makes sense. This is only a value that you need to set. It is not a sensor, so to speak, which means that in the real plane, you set this value once, it will take this value and based off of this value that you put in and the fuel flow that you have, it will then calculate the information on your performance page, for example, or your flight summary page, things like that. So in this case, in the real plane, you would now at this point in the FFC put in the amount of fuel you have before takeoff in the fuel on board part. However, because the Majestic did not simulate this, they made it actually easier for you. It will actually calculate it automatically for you, so you don't need to worry about it. That's why we've already set the fuel on the ramp as we had it. That's something you would do in real life. And then you would then do this checklist. So let's call for the checklist. Before takeoff checklist to the line.
Flight attendants, please be seated for departure. FA notification received. Takeoff briefing complete. Cabin PA complete. Condition levers.
Max.
Max. Trims.
3 set.
3 set. Takeoff warning test.
Tested.
Flight controls check free. Flight taxi.
Flight.
Radar terrain. Radar on both sides. Transponder TCAS on alt. Before takeoff checklist complete to the line.
Okay, so now we just wait for ATC clearance. If for some reason you're not allowed to take off, or it might take a while for takeoff, do another PA for a takeoff delay. So press PA and then do takeoff delay right here. Of course, that's all optional. PAs are optional, but just to add a little bit of realism. Once you're cleared to line up, go ahead and turn off the park brake. We'll start taxiing towards the runway, and you call for the below the line checklist. That's when the FO will then turn on the lights, and you don't have to do anything here. Below the line.
Bleeds min off. External lights on. Runway.
Runway 03. Heading 023.
Before takeoff checklist complete.
So we're lined up. Once you're ready for, once you're cleared for takeoff by ATC, turn off the taxi lights, and you can take off. So we'll also be talking about rejected takeoff in the supplementary procedures part. So don't worry about that yet. However, if there's something that happens, all you have to do is call stop and then reject the takeoff. That's pretty much the basic stuff. It gets a bit more. There's a few more things you can say after that, but we, like I said, we won't be discussing that today. The weather radar on. So once you're clear for takeoff, we then take off, and what you need to say is, once you set your power thrust, say check power, and he knows then that we're in the takeoff roll. He'll call 80 knots, he'll call obviously checked or also 80 knots, and then V1 rotate, gear up, the usual stuff. So when he calls positive rate, you say gear up. At 1,000 feet AGL, or at even 400 feet, you can already call nav. So you say select nav, as we've discussed before. You'll then select nav. If you want him to turn the autopilot on, say autopilot on. You'll then turn it on. And at 1,000 feet AGL, you then want to say a pretty long phrase, but it will get the job done. Say flaps 0, IAS 185, climb checklist to the line. All in one phrase, real quick, or not real quick, but all in one phrase that he understands it. But of course, only if you're ready for flaps 0. Because we're using ref speeds and increase, we need to add 20 knots to this 148. So we want to try to reach 168 before we say flaps 0, IAS 185. So we're gonna, once we normal takeoff procedure is to first rotate at about 6 to 8 degrees. We're gonna keep that today a bit longer than usual, just so we are a bit faster on the way. And as soon as we reach our climb speed of 168 approximately, we'll then pitch up to as much until we stay there, and then we'll call flaps 0. Actually, we can call flap 0 at VFRI plus 20, so 157. We can already call flap 0. So then what you will do, you will hold 185 knots to about 2,500 feet AGL, and at that point you can either hold 185 knots or you can set a different climb speed, which you should never set more than 240 knots, or especially 250 knots, or a normal takeoff is 210. But we will not discuss that. We will always, or I always will climb with 185 until 10,000 feet, and then after 10,000 feet we'll continue our climb with a better profile. So, let's do it. Check power.
Power checked. 80 knots.
Checked.
V1, rotate. Positive rate.
Gear up.
Gear up.
Select nav.
Nav selected. Acceleration altitude.
Autopilot on.
Autopilot's on.
LNAV. Pitch hold.
Check.
LNAV. Flap 0, IAS 185, climb checklist to the line.
Climb checklist completed to the line.
So he will set rev speeds to increase after 1,000 feet automatically. So you don't have to worry about that.
1,000 to go. Alt cell.
Set flight level 200. So now he'll set flight level 200. And I'll select to make sure that's also checked. He should normally do that as well. And now we're just waiting to climb to 10,000 feet. Once you pass transition altitude, which we are now, you can set standard. Oops, wrong one. Set standard altimeter. But in the real world, you would only set the primary flight displays. You would set the standby. You would keep the standby at their current one, just in case we need to return still.
Looks like we're picking up some ice.
If that's the case, so then now we need to talk about level 3 de-icing or anti-icing. If level 3 anti-icing is suspected, which
Flight level 200.
which appears at around which appears only when ice detected indication comes up. What you want to include is also the airframe mode select to fast. That's something you would also set as well, including level 1, 2, and level 1 and 2 items as well. Level 3 is always 1, 2 items and the level 3 items together. Level 2 is always level 1 and 2, and then level 1 is obviously just level 1. And that's standard stuff. Alright, we're reaching 10,000 feet, so call the below the line checklist, and we're going to increase our speed to 210 knots. Below the line. So he's going to do his flows, and what we're going to do is we're going to climb via a different climb rate. We're going to use 210. I'm just going to set 210 just... oh shoot, wrong direction. Just so we have it done already. But here's why we're setting 210. So they're, depending on the airline, every airline has its own way of climbing or best profile. And here is the different types that I know of. So there's type 1, which is 210 knots. That is the normal climb above 10,000 feet. That's what we're using. Then there's type 2, which is 185 knots, so you'd stay at 185. And that's the efficient climb above 10,000 feet. Then there's type 3, which is 160 knots, which you should avoid as much as possible, but that is the optimum speed for obstacles. So if we, again, if we were to use, for example, MTOP, a good thing would also to use 160 knots. Type 4 is 240 knots, and that is the best en route speed climb. Type 5 is 4 to 5, and Type 5 is the 4 to 6 degree pitch used for passenger comfort, and that is exactly what we will use. After 15,000 feet approximately, we'll then start using the pitch mode instead of speed mode. So we'll talk about that once we reach 15,000 feet. Other things you can do: if it's nighttime at 10,000 feet, you would turn off the logo light. We don't require it anymore at this stage. If you turn on the wing light, that's also off. Make sure that's off. And you can see now that ice detector is no longer available. We'll now turn off all the icing or anti-icing level 3 and 2 items. We're reaching 15,000 feet. To change to pitch mode, just select IAS mode again. You'll see that you'll be at pitch hold, and just change the pitch to match the 5-degree angle, and that's all you need to do. And the aircraft will then decelerate low slowly. That's normal. That's what you want. As long as it keeps the 5-degree pitch, it's fine. And as long as you don't go into a stall, which you should not be going into anyways. It's perfectly safe. If you're happy to release the cabin, go ahead and turn the seatbelt signs off. If the altimeter standards is set standard, we'll check the pressurization, make sure everything is pressurizing normally. And of course, every time ice protection is required, we'll go ahead and set ice protection. Well then, we'll wait now until we reach cruise level.